Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete another episode of our adventure in the Cold Bog with the Cult of Jingz. Now first of all, apologies for taking a while with the upload of this video. Sadly, I once again had some health issues and this time I actually thought that they were heart related, so I think you can imagine that I was pretty concerned about that and wasn't really focused on making videos. Luckily though, after quite a few tests, it turns out that my heart is perfectly healthy and that there is nothing to worry about. Still, I hope you understand that I wanted to get that thoroughly checked, which unfortunately took a while. Now, back to the more entertaining stuff. Last time we left off after our first blinding ritual, as colonist Freya is on track to become a very powerful, albeit completely blind psycaster. Today we are starting things off with the construction of a secondary defense layer to our southwest. That is where the largest part of the map is still an open area, so chances are high that enemies will come through here at some point. And while we did handle last episode's breaching rate quite nicely, keep in mind that our colony wealth still needs to increase substantially over the next episodes, and investing some of that wealth in defenses is never a bad idea. We are also running a bit low on food at the moment, as Tuk the Cook was obviously needed in that last fight and did not have time to make more meals, but we have a good number of animals on the map and should be able to solve this issue quickly. One more thing that we are taking care of here in the beginning is the construction of a small hospital. You guys definitely mentioned that a few times in the comments of the last video, and I agree, it is not exactly convenient to have our patients scattered all over the village. So to streamline that process a bit, we are now actually moving Skwiggs' bed into our tree temple, which is actually the most impressive building that we have, so it's a fitting home for our leader, and that frees up a room so that we can turn Freya's old bedroom into a small hospital. In the meantime, Armando finishes another excellent quality Guardian helmet, so Combat Specialist Donut will receive some additional protection once she has hauled the dead buffalo back to the village. And we do actually have a bit more equipment coming along, as Armando has just finished a blindfold and is now working on a leather hood. While he's tailoring, Redini digs a grave and shortly after constructs the new bed for Freya inside of Skwiggs' old room, and then it's time for a burial, as Freya is carrying her dead claw-dried krakenoid to its grave, while some of our colonists stand by to pay their respects. The leather hood is then finished a few moments later, and both hood and blindfold will now go on Redini. The hood comes with a 20% social impact bonus, which actually does not influence all that much. As far as I know, prisoner recruitment, conversion speed and trade prices are all calculated based on other things, but still it will help Redini be more liked, and as our tree speaker and the person regularly cutting others in their face, that is probably not too bad either. The blindfold then is actually more for cosmetics, but since Redini is half blind anyway and doesn't really rely on her eyesight for many of her daily tasks, I think we can add it for flavor and a small mood bonus, not to mention that together with the hood I think it just looks fantastic. On the following morning then, Redini goes to work on that prisoner we captured in the last episode, quickly decimating her resistance, but otherwise the first half of the day remains mostly uneventful as we focus on restocking meals and constructing defenses. In the afternoon it is time for another tree torment as we give psycaster Freya yet another ritual scar. The more she has, the higher her pain level, and with that the recharge rate of her neural heat used to cast psychic abilities. A scar on the torso is then actually pretty damn good, as it increases her pain level by a whopping 11%, which should have a noticeable effect on her ability as a psycaster. Unfortunately though, our colonists are not impressed by the ceremony. Perhaps they expected the scar to be placed elsewhere, and based on Redini's history, who can blame them? Speaking of Redini, despite her visual impairment, she is now tasked with administering some herbal medicine to take care of Kevin's asthma, and I'm actually not entirely sure if self-tending is an option here and whether or not the expected tent quality would be better compared to Redini, although you likely can't do much worse than a more or less blind woman with a medical skill of 5. In other words, considering that because of his smoke leaf addiction, Kevin's mental stability is perhaps a bit fragile at the moment as well, a secondary healer wouldn't be the worst thing in the world right now, so perhaps we should keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, we jump ahead to the next day, which for the most part remains as uneventful as the one before, with our focus still largely on hunting, cooking and construction. Thanks to his gourmand trait, Tuk sadly goes on a food binge in the middle of the day, which is bad not only because he will now eat through our meager supplies, but also because it prevents him from making more. Still, at least our small hospital is coming along, of course equipped with the standard marble slab beds, and in the afternoon Freya is up for cutting yet again, as we look to complete her third scar and raise that pain level even further. Ritual music, as always, provided by Eric Murray, you can find a link to that down below, and this time the scar goes on Freya's arm, raising her pain level to 24%. With 3 ritual scars, Freya is now actually considered sufficiently scarred for the Cult of Jingz, and our cultists also seem to be satisfied with the procedure. After the ritual, Freya's neural heat recovery rate now sits at 1.27 per second. Just to compare that, last time we left off with 0.94, so those 2 scars definitely had an impact and should make Freya a very capable psycaster. In the evening, Tuk then also suffers food poisoning to go along with his food binge. Looks like he just couldn't stick to simple meals and had to try some raw berries, and he will now feel the consequences in what I assume is not going to be a pleasant night for him. On the bright side, on the next morning we are greeted by a new grizzly bear, as Vladimir has given birth to Draco, named after the patron supporter of the same name, and as always chosen from the list of all patrons in the naming rights tier and above. So that makes it 6, and in terms of colonists, we are about to reach the hopefully not unlucky 13, as Redini has just managed to recruit our prisoner. Of course, she needs a new name as well, so we are now welcoming Skwiggs into our ranks, and you can probably see here why I decided to recruit her. I have been mentioning for quite some time now that we need someone to take over animal handling duties from Coco, so that we can turn Coco into a full-time plant specialist, which we actually need to do pretty soon to maximize our Devil Strand harvest. Up until now, the plan was to train Chutney as our new animal handler, but honestly that took just way too long, and after seeing Skwiggs here, I quickly abandoned those plans altogether. So we are now looking at our new dedicated animal handler, who should also be able to help out with construction work, a good thing considering that a now blindfolded Redini is not exactly becoming more useful at that. The combination of industrious and quick sleeper should also make Skwiggs an extremely productive colonist, although that is somewhat mitigated by the fact that one of Maniac's arrows destroyed her lung, which ultimately led to her getting captured in the first place. Still, I think we have a very promising new cultist on our hands here, so let's give her the face mask she deserves. Her first scar will probably follow suit shortly. Now, with a new member in Liviana, we also need a new house for her, and while we're at it and have plenty of wood available, let's also construct a few more bridges. I think this will really give the village a lovely feel with all of those wooden walkways, not to mention that it should also significantly cut down on travel times. In the evening then, Redini, despite her visual limitations, finishes the 3rd bed in our small hospital, and just before nightfall I think we can squeeze in one more tree tournament, although this time we will actually only have Redini and her target Specs participate. That way everyone else can spend the evening as they please and will not be held up for 3 hours, and even if we end up with a terrible ritual, the mood penalty is still so small that it should not become a problem. All in all though, the chances of a positive outcome are about 70%, and considering that we need to get up to 3 ritual scars with everyone in the colony, I think this is the way we are going to do it from here on out, and will only assemble the full Cult of Jingz for special occasions. Specs' 3rd scar then goes on her right arm, where she already has one, and this is the rare case where scarification can be a bit problematic. 1 scar will not give any penalties, but 2 on the same body part will reduce its efficiency. Only by 2% in this case, and the ritual is also still spectacular, despite no one watching it, but this scar stacking is a risk that we should keep in mind, especially if we eventually decide to crank the scarification aspect of the Cult of Jingz even higher. In the very early morning hours then, we have a trade caravan arrive, so let's have Redini take a look at their inventory once they have made it into the village. This caravan is actually extremely convenient, as we can use it to finally dump a lot of the excess furs and leathers that we have. You can see it here, we would be able to sell off almost 3,000 silver worth of goods. Unfortunately though, the caravan only has about 1,000 to spare, so we'll grab some meat and agave fruit in exchange. That should certainly help our food supply and cut down on our hunting efforts for at least a few days. Colony wealth-wise, we are at 107,000 now, down from 110 before the trade, and still a good way off from the 350 that we need. Now, you may have also noticed it on the right side of the screen, we still have a quest that is about to expire, as we are about to have ourselves a guest. For 19 days, we need to keep her alive and at least somewhat happy, and like I said in the last video, with 13 people already living in Liviana, one more mouth should not make a difference. So we are accepting this quest for the Glitter World medicine, that could always come in handy in case of an emergency, and then the first thing we'll do is give our guest a new name. If you want to live with the Cult of Jingz, you have to conform to its customs, so at least for the next 19 days, we are now calling her Raven, after patron supporter Silent Raven. Her skills and traits are sadly nothing to get excited about, but that should leave her with plenty of time to relax and socialize, which should help her mood, even though the things going on around her probably won't. And of course, we can't pass up the chance to impose our beliefs on a newcomer, and the first use of Redini's conversion ability already brings Raven down to only 62% certainty. Still, for at least a few more days, Raven is probably going to question her decision to stay with us. Case in point, it is time for another tree torment. This time Redini takes care of the riot. And even though Raven won't actively participate, just like the rest of Liviana, I think hearing of what we do inside of that temple is going to be challenging to say the least, but of course it takes more to stop us from being a tree-loving murder cult with a taste for ritual sacrifice. Redini also goes back to her old habits and gives Thoraya a lovely scar right on the eye, and it looks like the mighty Jingz was pleased by that, or it was just coincidence. In any case, a psychic soothe improves the mood of all females in Liviana, and we have quite a few of those. Once again then, the ritual also ends with a positive outcome, and that concludes another day, at the end of which we are officially transitioning into spring, although the Cold Bog still looks very much snowy and frozen. On the next morning, it is time for Kevin to get another ritual scar. That will hopefully improve his mood at least a little bit, and while the ritual is underway, Jekna seems to have no mood issues whatsoever, and even experiences a shoot frenzy as a result of being happy. Shortly after then, with the ritual still underway, we also have a quest pop up, and Thoraya does her duty and tries to convert our guest, although for now with little success. The quest, meanwhile, is interesting, as we would need to protect another crashed shuttle and could obtain some decent rewards for it, although we would have to act quickly. The 12-hour time window here is far from generous. First of all though, it's a brand new torso scar for Kevin, which at least for the moment makes his stats drop even further, but don't worry too much about that. A lot of the issues here are caused by his withdrawal, and we should hopefully be able to beat that sooner or later. Until we do, we can watch Chutney, Tuk and Maniac go on a small buffalo hunting trip, and while they bring their prey back to the village, we are getting ready to defend that shuttle. That means we are stopping our defensive building project to reclaim some granite, and we'll also have Skwiggs and Raven dig for more. In that moment, we are also informed of a small group of pilgrims who are visiting us to see the Horn of Edmo. Unfortunately, they won't really be able to help us in the upcoming fight, but we'll gladly take them in anyway. Maniac then also starts mining while Jekna produces new granite blocks for us. I think you know where this is going. We want to be able to build a small defensive line around that shuttle, just to better protect the essential characters that come with it, and whose survival decides about us failing or completing the quest. By deconstructing a few of the walls from the former ancient danger, we can then add to our building materials, and eventually we have enough and should not delay much longer. After all, we do not want our colonists to stay up all night. So let's accept the quest, and we'll actually pick the Eltex gear as our reward. The tech prints won't be of much use, as we have limited ourselves to pre-industrial research for this playthrough, and we're also not exactly interested in becoming best buddies with the Empire, while the Eltex gear could boost our psycasters, and that is exactly what we're looking for. The shuttle then arrives quite a bit away from the village, so we'll have to see whether or not we can actually get all the plant defenses up and running before our enemies arrive. But worst case scenario, we fail the quest and lose a bit of goodwill with the Empire. As far as I know, the attackers will retreat again should they manage to kill the shuttle's commander, so this is a low risk and potentially high reward situation for us. The idea behind the wall around the shuttle, which did take a good amount of micromanaging, is to simply protect that shuttle commander, as they have a tendency to get drawn into combat quite easily, and won't just run away, for example, but they will stay pretty close to the shuttle, so the wall should be an effective barrier between them and the enemies, and at least buy us some time for their protection. Unfortunately though, the raiding party does arrive a bit earlier than planned and we have not quite finished our work, so it looks like we'll have to hold the line and keep the shuttle commander safe the old-fashioned way. The fact that 20 of our 21 enemies are carrying melee weapons might help with that, although the fact that most of them also have shield belts might negate that advantage. So here we go, setting up positions behind the trees, always on the lookout for that one enemy with the assault rifle. To get us started, one brave, albeit clearly suicidal Imperial soldier rushes towards the enemy group and buys us a few seconds to cast a vertical pulse, which sadly also hits our doomed ally, causing a noticeable relationship penalty with the Empire. The incapacitated enemies, however, are easy targets for both us and the remaining 3 allied soldiers, and perhaps we can delay the advance a bit further with a berserk from Skwiggs here, which should hopefully make our enemies attack each other for a while. Anyone who gets too close gets hit with a stun, although I accidentally misclicked and hit our ally with it here. But Freya has so much neural heat, she should be able to cast this a few times in a row without any issues whatsoever, not to mention that Maniac can also use it. Another vertical pulse from Skwiggs then slows things down once more, but our attackers are getting closer, and unfortunately Freya's dryads are taking their sweet time to catch up. At least the bears are already here though and ready to jump in now, but this is very much the point where things are getting messy. And while Freya can indeed fire off one stun after another, Skwiggs' neural heat has already reached its limits, so we need to exceed those now to be able to cast another berserk, risking potential damage to our colony leader in the process. Still, all of that is not enough to prevent Armando from going down, and as you can see, the shuttle commander and the civilian friend are also under attack. As we send Freya over to help out with a few more stuns, Skwiggs also experiences a psychic breakdown, but luckily not before we send our enemies packing. So this was definitely a messy fight in the end, and we have quite a few injuries to report. Although Skwiggs' breakdown is probably the least concerning, she will only suffer from a mild consciousness penalty for the next 2 days. Took, Jekna, Armando and Chutney did take some wounds though, with Jekna actually losing her left big toe, while Armando went down after taking some comparatively light damage. It's likely better that way though, as having our crafter lose a limb would have been problematic. Chutney meanwhile also took some heavy hits, but again we survived, and so did most of our allies, at least after conveniently teleporting the last attacker still engaged at the shuttle away from us. In the meantime, Chutney did collapse as well, however, and so we are now carrying 2 colonists back into our small hospital, while our doctor spends a few more moments here on the battlefield, stabilizing a potential prisoner. A local muffalo then also goes mad, but as long as we don't forget about it, that shouldn't be too dangerous. The animal is also already injured. With the prisoner being carried away, Leafheart Kevin then also tends to one of our fallen allies, and a few moments later the rescue shuttle arrives, and Kevin is even kind enough to carry the last soldier into it here, so that they can all safely make it back home. That completes the quest and earns us 2 pieces of Eltex gear, which we'll take a closer look at soon. For now though, while we patch up everyone, we should talk a bit about what our colonists just experienced. This right here was the first time that our colony, in its current form, has fought side by side with people carrying proper guns. And I would like to believe that some of our more combat-savvy folks did notice that those rifles did some pretty good damage, and that we have some weapons lying around of our own that look eerily similar. What I'm trying to say is, this here might be the point where the Cult of Jingz decides it's time to pick up those guns and see what they can do in the hands of some skilled shooters. Now don't get me wrong, this does not mean that I'm proposing that we throw the entire Neolithic cult concept overboard, but perhaps our colonists are open-minded enough to see the potential of these new weapons. After all, we are led by a bloodthirsty psychopath who should probably relish the opportunity to inflict even more damage on her enemies. So let me know what you think about that. We would of course only be able to use weapons that we salvage from the battlefield or obtain via trade or quests. Researching anything above Neolithic and medieval technologies will remain forbidden. Personally, I think from a more gameplay mechanics perspective, it will likely be inevitable to use proper guns sooner or later if we want to survive the later stages of this playthrough. At some point, I fear that no amount of bears, dryads and psychic abilities will be able to withstand that proper huge pirate raid with shields, guns and armor, although we will of course still try to use those to our advantage as much as possible. Still, I think today's fight gives us a pretty good narrative reason to make the switch, so if you agree with that then let me know, and if you don't then of course please do so as well. In the meantime, we have watched a day of recovery pass by, and with most of the medical work done, Kevin now goes into a mental break and begins wandering around aimlessly. That leaves the remaining healing duties to Redini again, and things get even worse. Donut also breaks because of those family members who died, and is now going to destroy a valuable Megasloth corpse. That needs to be stopped of course, so imprisonment it is. And you know what? After releasing her again, Redini and Donut are close to the tree temple, so we might as well get one more tree torment completed. And who would have guessed it, Donut's third and for now final scar goes on the eye, just the way it should be. And I think with that we have reached a good point to make the cut for today. The Cult of Jingz is still growing, and perhaps it has just found itself at an important turning point. So while we think a bit more about whether or not our swamp people would look good with assault rifles, let's take a look at some things that definitely look fantastic. I am of course talking about our weekly fan art showcase. This week we start things off with a submission from Royal Snow Angel, this one showing our now blinded psycaster Freya, and I have to say this does look like a person you do not want to see at the other side of the battlefield, and keep in mind she will only get more powerful. Up next we have a rendition of Tree Speaker Redini, here in the process of converting Donut, and not yet covered in a leather hood and blindfold. Finally then, we have a throwback to our Ice Sheet series, as Tina Sipple painted the Muffalo that was actually named after her in that series, although with much more green behind it than we ever saw for the entirety of that series. Also, on behalf of patron Ben Ballantyne, I would like to wish their girlfriend the best of luck with her PhD defense, a request that actually hit pretty close to home as I have my own coming up sooner or later, so I have a good idea of how much pressure is on your shoulders in that situation, but fingers crossed, I'm sure you'll do just fine. And that's it for today, so as always, if you have enjoyed the episode, then I would be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up, and if you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or check out and maybe even pledge to the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.